Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about The Commuter. Liam Neeson, as an action hero, I think was made by Taken, but I think his career has continued by the director Collet-Serra. This is the fourth film he's made with him, and if you look at most of his action films, which are mostly Taken movies and stuff with this guy, I don't think there's that many exceptions to that. These are usually kind of the reasons he has a career, as the Taken sequels really suck, and these are usually a little more enjoyable. He's a fun director. He likes being a ridiculous B-movie director. His last movie was actually The Shallows. He also did Nonstop, Unknown, and Run All Night. The only one I personally haven't seen is Run All Night, although I would like to. But I think this film shares a lot with Nonstop. Now the problem is that it is also a shittier version of Nonstop. It's like, hey, remember how Nonstop was on a plane? What if we put it on a train? And that's sort of the biggest issue with that, is because what was more of like a little inspired or sort of understanding the B genre he was in, working like a good B action studio director in Nonstop. This looks like that director who sort of didn't really care as much and kind of plays within the things he knows how to get a movie to work, but sort of just applies them to this and doesn't think about how that would work functionally. So yeah, in a lot of ways this is the shittier version of Nonstop. If you want to see this movie and haven't seen Nonstop, you should probably just see Nonstop, because that is the better version of this. I actually didn't think about that before I saw this. I was like, hey, Liam Neeson and Collet-Serra are doing a dumb action movie again. I'm there. And I was. And I think that is sort of the biggest issue with this film, is that it feels like everyone's sort of running out of steam. Liam Neeson starring in an action movie thing isn't as kind of new and fresh as it was before. I guess it's been about like almost 10 years, about 10 years, if I forget what year Taken came out. But, you know, I feel like honestly, Liam Neeson likes working with this director, and I think it works in the kind of ridiculousness of these kind of big action starring movies. But I don't think, like, even Collet-Serra, who came off of a very inspired, probably one of his better movies, The Shallows, to this feels like they kind of like thought this could have been, hey, we'll do another ridiculous one, and sort of realized maybe this is just too stupid, and sort of like don't really get past that in a lot of ways. Now, I think one of the bigger ways that Nonstop worked and this didn't is Nonstop understand if you're doing like, hey, everyone's on a plane and that plane could crash, or there's a thing on a plane, or there's snakes even on a plane, or anything on a stupid plane, is you introduce all those characters. In The High and the Mighty, it's kind of a very basic, kind of boring setup, but it's basically they have everyone come to the ticket counter and be like, oh boy, work's really bothering me, too bad I got a drinking problem, and you know, stuff like that. I don't know, like, oh, my kids are so annoying, why are we taking them on this trip? Oh, we're so in love, you know, you go through all that crap. But there's a reason you do that, because you have a million stupid characters on the plane, and unless you have a sequence like that or something to explain everybody and understand, you know, whatever their personal bullshit is, when you get to those points where you have to care about those characters, you won't unless you have that scene. It is a little silly and stupid, but when you have like 34 people or however many people, there's more than 34 people on a plane, you still focus on like a certain amount of characters on that plane, a certain, you know, 4 or 5 or something, but at least you kind of know or familiar with them. On a commuter train, there's like way too many people. Like, there's lots of people who I take the subway, at least not the same as a commuter train. There's certain people you see every day, but for the most part there are a lot of people you will never see again, and it's hard to explain all of their baggage on a train. It's just the whole idea of the setup of getting on it doesn't really work for this kind of a thing, and this film never really gets past that. The plot of this basically being that Liam Neeson, who has just been fired from his insurance job, who has a kid going to college and a wife and things, you know, they're basically hand to mouth, even though he has a big nice insurance job. Maybe he shouldn't have had a big house, but whatever, I don't know his finances. But he lost his job and he's all upset, and he's taking the train home, and then this woman played by Vera Farmiga comes up to him and says if he can identify this person on the train who's holding a certain bag, and they will give him $100,000, and he just has to put a tracking device on this person who they're not going to tell him who, which is a little stupid, frankly. If you're going to pay that much money for it, you just give him more direct instructions, which is another problem with this movie, I guess. And so he has to do that, and then when he starts to refuse, even though he did take the beginning of the money or something, which I think was like 2,000 or something, which is still a lot for just to look at someone and put something on them. That's a lot of money. I know he's Liam Neeson, and he's probably a little expensive. But anyway, what he starts refusing, they send him his wife's wedding ring and start to go after them and start to kill anyone he tells about this plot. So he's almost forced to do it as things get crazier and crazier on this train. The thing with this plot is, like, yes, it is like almost like Nonstop, which was stupid anyway, but it's almost like that film like sort of got into its own plot and B-ness. You sort of were cool with it. In this, it like really goes too far into that. But it also has the problem of, yes, he has regulars on the train, and other than Jonathan Banks, you don't really get to know any of them that well. Like, Jonathan Banks, I would even say, doesn't have much of a character other than, like, hey, he's old, and they're friends, and you're like, okay, like, anonymous person. Like, you need more for that to sort of connect for an audience. All you'd have to do is, like, hey, I'm a grandpa, oh man, my grandkids, and I love going fishing. You know he's a grandpa, you know he likes fishing. That is more info than they gave you in this movie, and those are pretty easy fucking things. You already get a basic understanding of this guy. You could say how he loves being on the water or some crap. There you go. That's not hard. You don't get that from any of them. He waves some, and you're like, hey, it's Black Lady, and other woman, and that guy, and the guy who takes the tickets, and you're like, I have so much to connect to as a person here. And that's like automatically an issue, because the only one you're really following is Liam Neeson, who sort of is probably not as into doing these movies anymore, and you can kind of feel it. In certain parts, when this film gets uber ridiculous, it kind of, for me at least, broke through, and you're like, oh, I'm sort of into this fucking thing. And the use of like people like Patrick Wilson and Sam Neill, and they kind of have like arcs and twists and things like that, I think sort of worked. And, you know, towards, while you go through this, you learn people like the person he borrowed his cell phone from, and the guy he's sort of accused of maybe not being a regular even though he was, or something like that. Spoilers, I guess. And the various things you know about them, but you don't really know enough to really connect in a way, and they kind of drag this movie out more than it should. And this movie's not very long, so you wonder like why they did that. You know, they could have connected a lot of these dots earlier in the film. For a lot of it, you're like, oh look, anonymous looking girl, guy with a guitar. This isn't a joke, by the way. Like, these are real personality traits. Goldman Sachs guy, they call him. You know, all these various things, they never really let you connect to it. It only is defined as like this guy, oh, supposedly named Prin also, and find that he has a bag and put a tracker on and all that stuff. But there should have been more to this, and I think Nonstop was a dumb movie that I actually really liked. I put it probably higher in the Liam Neeson shooting people kind of thing, and I thought they also had a better cast and probably more money behind it. And they even have a really inspired opening sequence where it shows like cutting between, like, through his morning commute, from waking up his son to putting on his tie to going to breakfast to his wife driving him to the commuter train and so forth, and the various times they've had arguments or jokes or laughed or had fun or not talking to each other all throughout it. And that was a great sequence. I will agree with anyone who says like they shouldn't have had title cards going throughout it, because it really like got you kind of to care about his family. Like, anytime it's like, oh, his family's gonna die, I feel like I've been through 20 commutes with them and I sort of care about them. And I don't think this film really understood what's important to make this kind of a narrative of a thriller work. It just cared about doing the action beats and having Liam Neeson run around up and down the aisles and things like that. But what worked about Nonstop is it had Julianne Moore in it a lot. It had various different cast members. It had people you could follow. I sort of got into it, and the Commuter kind of like sort of doesn't really try to. It's kind of like a harder thing to do, but it's not like they tried and failed. It's like they didn't really try that much, you know? And I understand, like, you're not going to have personalities of each of 1,000 people who are on this fucking train. That'd just be impossible, and narratively would be such a, I mean, maybe it would work somehow, but not for this kind of a movie. He could have had just 5 different people, and Jonathan Banks should have been like, hey, let's talk about trout or something. He doesn't have to fish, but you know what I mean. It's just like they needed something like that, and this movie didn't really seem to understand what exactly it needed to be. And it's crazy because both these guys made like a movie that is very similar to this many years before, and I think it doesn't come out of the shadow of Nonstop. Nonstop worked very well in being kind of like a fun, dumb B action movie. Jermaine Collet-Serra was somebody who I thought was like a really good B action movie director, and I loved, you know, The Shallows and Nonstop are two of the ones I really liked from him. He made a fucking seagull into a personality. He knows how to do this, and it's really sad kind of seeing him not do it as well and just be kind of like a bland B action director and watching Liam Neeson be in kind of a bland B action movie. This is kind of towards the downturn of someone's career where they make the forgettable stuff that kind of loses all the goodwill for an audience who, you know, usually normally like these kind of movies and brought you up to that level. This makes you kind of doubt why that person is on that level, and also, you know, maybe not want to see their movies, because it was fun seeing those dumb, enjoyable action movies that, despite being dumb, they were fun and thrilling in a way, and just see something that's just fucking stupid. And I think The Commuter kind of, it pushes itself to that place and actually sort of comes back to it in the end, but doesn't make up for the fact that this was a really shoddily made B movie by a director and a star who frankly fucking know better at this point. So if you have seen The Commuter and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.